and welcome back to Law, Justice, and Social Change. I'm Ellie Ballard, and today we're going to continue our conversation on theories of social change with the functionalist and the conflict perspectives. The functionalist perspective views social change as an adaptive response to tensions within a system. Now, they favor gradual reform and stability, while the conflict perspective sees change as driven by power struggles and inequalities, advocating for more radical transformation to address social problems. Let's take a deeper look at both. Functionalists see society as a complex system made up of interdependent parts, like the legal system, education, or family, and even the economy, all work together to maintain stability and social order. From this perspective, social change is not sudden or chaotic. It's gradual and adaptive process. When one part of society changes, something like maybe technology, law, or even the economy, the other parts adjust to restore that equilibrium. Now, some of the key points of the functionalist perspective include the idea that change is necessary for society to remain stable in the face of new challenges. It usually happens through evolution and not revolution. Institutions like the criminal justice system adapt over time to better meet the needs of a modern society. Social problems then would signal dysfunction, and then change is the way to fix them. For example, the shift from community-based watch groups to professional police forces in growing urban areas actually reflects a functionalist view. New social conditions required more formal and specialized institutions to maintain order. Some of the key theorists are probably already familiar to you, right? Durkheim, although we explored Emile Durkheim within the context of evolutionary theories, he's still firmly rooted within the functionalist perspective. His ideas about social solidarity and the function of crime helped shape a school of thought that really focuses on how law reinforces shared values and preserves stability in complex societies. Now, Ferdinand Tönnies describes two types of societies, Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. A Gemeinschaft refers to small, close-knit communities where relationships are personal and based on tradition and shared values. Social order is maintained informally through family and community ties. In contrast, Gesellschaft describes modern urban societies where relationships are more impersonal and based on self-interest, with order maintained by formal laws and institutions. His concept really helps us understand how social relationships and systems like the criminal justice system evolve with modernization. Now, Talcott Parsons viewed social change as gradual, evolutionary process where societies adapt to maintain stability. His theory emphasized that societies become more complex, that as societies become more complex, their institutions undergo this structural differentiation. This was to perform specialized functions and to maintain social order. Now, lastly, we'll talk about Robert Merton. He saw social changes resulting from strain or tension within the social structure. When there is a gap between cultural goals and the means to achieve them, individuals may adapt in ways that challenge the system, and this leads to change over time. So let's look at each one of these in more detail. Ferdinand Tönnies lived between 1855 and 1936. He was a German sociologist and philosopher, considered one of the founders of classical sociology, alongside Max Weber and Emile Durkheim. Tönnies studied philosophy, economics, and history. He eventually earned a doctorate in classical philology, the study of language in oral and written historical sources. He held a professorship at the University of Kiel, where he worked most of his life. Now, Tönnies was known for his rigorous academic approach and his deep concern for the social effects of modernization and industrialization. He was also a progressive thinker, advocating for workers' rights and democracy in an increasingly authoritarian Germany. Tony's was writing in the late 19th and early 20th century, which of course is a time of rapid industrialization, urbanization, and nation building in Germany, and really across Europe. These sweeping changes really disrupted traditional ways of life. Rural communities were declining, cities were rapidly growing, and old social structures were being replaced with new bureaucratic systems. This backdrop of transformation deeply influenced Tony's work, especially in his most famous book, Gemeinschaft and Gesellschaft. This translates to community and society. Tony's theory isn't a linear model of change, but a typological framework that contrasts two ideal types of social organization. The first is Gemeinschaft, which translates to community. It's a social order based on personal, direct, and emotional bonds. For example, rural villages, families, religious communities. These communities that have strong shared values and traditions. Relationships are rooted generally in kinship and long-term ties. And informal social control is really how we control society. So gossip, moral norms. Gemeinschaft societies are stable and cohesive. They're resistant to rapid change. Now, in contrast, Gesellschaft translates to society, is a social order based on impersonal, indirect, and contractual relationships. Examples might include like modern cities, corporations, and bureaucracies. In Gesellschaft societies, rational self-interest replaces emotional ties, law, contracts, and institutions that govern behavior. And there's an emphasis on efficiency, specialization, and formal systems. Gesellschaft reflects the inevitable transition of modern society, efficient but alienating. Tony's didn't advocate that all societies should or would become fully Gesellschaft. Instead, he saw that these types were really coexisting and competing within societies undergoing modernization. His work really reflects early sociological concern about modernization and the loss of traditional community values. Now, unlike evolutionists, he didn't view Gesellschaft as better or higher, just different. And it had its advantages and it had its cost. Now, Tony's typology provides a lens to analyze how social bonds shift over time, especially in criminal justice or education and even governance. Let's say in criminal justice, a Gemeinschaft, justice would be based on custom, informal mediation, and restoration. While in Gesellschaft, justice would be delivered through formal institutions, codified laws, and very punitive systems. So this is really useful in understanding tensions between restorative justice, more Gemeinschaft-like, and mass incarceration, this kind of big professional policing in Gesellschaft style. So Tony's gave sociology a foundational vocabulary for understanding how social cohesion changes with modernization. And his ideas still shape debates about community and bureaucracy and tradition versus rationality and alienation in modern life, social policy and justice reform. Talcott Parsons lived between 1902 and 1979. He was an American sociologist and arguably the most influential figure in U.S. sociology during the mid-20th century. He earned his PhD from the University of Heidelberg and then later taught at Harvard. There he helped establish sociology really as a respected academic discipline in the United States. Parsons was known for his intellectual ambition. He sought to build a grand theory that could explain all aspects of social life. He drew his ideas from Max Weber, Emil Durkheim, and even Sigmund Freud. His most notable theoretical framework became known as structural functionalism. Now, Parsons wrote in the aftermath of the Great Depression, World War II, and during the rise of American global power and liberal democratic institutions. His work reflects an era that was deeply interested in order, stability, and the functioning of institutions, a key concern in the context of Cold War tensions and rapid social change. This post-war period was also marked by faith in science, progress, and systems thinking, all of which influenced Parsons' structural functionalist lens. Parsons developed the idea that society is a system made up of interrelated parts, each performing functions that contribute to the stability and survival of the whole. Social change in this view occurs through gradual and adaptive processes, not through revolution. Parsons develops the agile model, which spells out the 4 functions that are necessary for any system to survive. The first would be adaptation. This is like the economy has to adapt. Goal attainment. This is government. Integration. This is law and legal systems. And latency. These are culture and norms and education, how we transmit those culture and norms. When one part of the system changes, say technology or norms, then the other parts adjust to maintain balance. He also introduces structural differentiation. As society grows more complex, institutions evolve and specialize. For example, the criminal justice system develops separate roles for police, courts, and corrections. Parsons believed that social change was orderly and evolutionary, not chaotic, functional, that societies change to better meet new needs or challenges, and driven by increasing institutional complexity, with each institution adapting its role. Now, he emphasized value consensus, that a shared set of cultural values helps society remain stable even during change. Education, law, and religion all help reinforce this consensus. Parsons' theory helps explain why new criminal justice roles like forensic analysts or community policing units emerge in response to social needs. Or how laws evolve, things like civil rights legislation, Miranda rights, to align, of course, justice with more broader societal values. And why cohesion and legitimacy are essential when the system fails to maintain these, dysfunction or civil unrest may occur. For Parsons, the justice system is part of an integrative function. It holds society together by managing deviance and reinforcing norms. While his ideas have been critiqued for overlooking inequality and power, Parsons gave us the tools to really understand how and why institutions evolve, and his work laid the foundation for later theories of institutional development, systems theory, and policy design. He really does remain essential for understanding institutional reform as adaptive and not just reactionary, and really framing criminal justice as a function of broader societal values, and really showing how order and change can coexist in complex modern systems. Robert Merton was an American sociologist who lived from 1910 to 2003. He spent most of his career teaching at Columbia University, where he attained the rank of university professor. In 1994, he was awarded the National Medal of Science for his contributions to the field and for having founded the sociology of science. Now, Robert Merton explored social change through his theories of strain theory and anomie. He argued that societal structures and values can create pressures that lead to deviance or social unrest when there's a disconnection between culturally valued goals and the means to achieve them. Merton's strain theory posits that deviance arises when there's a gap between this culturally valued goals, like financial success, and the legitimate means to achieve the goal. This can cause strain. This strain can lead to individuals to adopt unconventional or even deviant behaviors to achieve the desired goals. Now, strain exists alongside anomie, right? So Merton built his idea of anomie upon Emil Durkheim's concept, which describes a state of normlessness or a breakdown of social norms. So Merton argued that when societal norms and values don't align with the opportunities available for individuals to achieve success, that it can lead to feelings of frustration, strain, and ultimately deviance. Now, Merton identified 5 ways individuals might adapt to strain. One would be conformity, innovation, ritualism, retreatism, and rebellion. In conformity, individuals accept both the cultural goals and the legitimate means to achieve them. Innovation, individuals accept the cultural goals but use unconventional or illegitimate means to achieve those goals. In ritualism, individuals essentially reject the cultural goals but continue to adhere to the legitimate means, often focusing on routine and rules. In retreatism, individuals reject both the goals and the legitimate means, often withdrawing from society. In rebellion, individuals reject both the cultural goals and the legitimate means and actively seek to replace them with an alternative set of goals and means. Now, Merton also makes a distinction between intended or manifest and unintended latent consequences of social structures and institutions. So he argued that not all functions are positive and some can even be dysfunctional, potentially leading to social problems or change. Merton's work really highlighted the importance of social structure in shaping individual behavior and social change. By examining the relationship between social goals, means, and opportunities, he provides insight into how social structures can create pressures that lead to deviance or social unrest. Let's look at an example of the functionalist perspective. In the 1960s to 1980s, rising crime rates, urban unrest, and poor police-community relations signaled dysfunction in traditional policing. According to the functionalist theories, these problems were a sign that the criminal justice system was out of balance with the changing needs of society. So the functional interpretation is that function, rising mistrust and crime, indicated that policing institutions needed to adapt. The introduction of community policing, which emphasizes collaboration, trust building, and problem solving, represented an evolution of the institution to restore social cohesion. So new roles like neighborhood liaison officers and practices like foot patrols, town halls, and youth outreach were introduced to reintegrate the police into communities. The functionalist takeaway? Well, social change is seen not as a breakdown, but as an adaptive process to restore social order and equilibrium. Conflict theory, rooted in Karl Marx's ideas, really views society as a dynamic arena of inequality and competition for resources, where social change arises from conflicts between groups with opposing interests. Now, conflict theory emphasizes the unequal distribution of power and resources within society, arguing that dominant groups use their power to maintain their privilege while subordinate groups struggle to gain more. Now, this might be easier stated as those who have the gold get to make the rules, and they do so in their favor so they can maintain their position in society while holding other groups down. Social change, according to conflict theory, is not a gradual process of adaptation or consensus, but rather a result of conflicts and struggles between different groups. Karl Marx theory highlights the conflict between the bourgeoisie, the owners of capital, and the proletariat, the workers, arguing that this class struggle is the primary driver of social change. Now, conflict theories theorists argue that social institutions like government, education, and religion reflect and reinforce existing inequalities rather than promoting fairness or equality. Conflict theory can be used to analyze various social problems such as war, poverty, discrimination, and revolutions, as well as to understand how these conflicts can lead to social change. Now, key thinkers in the conflict perspective are going to include, well, Karl Marx, who of course views society as driven by economic forces and class struggle. Max Weber, who believed that social change is driven by ideas, values, and leadership, not just economics. He emphasized rationalization, where modern societies shift from traditional to rule-based, efficient systems like bureaucracies. He also identified types of authority: traditional, charismatic, and legal rational, to explain how power and change occur in society. And George Simmel, who saw social change as emerging from everyday interactions and the dynamics of modern life. He focused on how urbanization, individualism, and social conflict can reshape relationships and identity. For Simmel, change is driven by tensions between individuals and society, especially in rapidly modernizing environments. Karl Marx lived between 1818 and 1883. Marx was a German philosopher, economist, historian, and of course a revolutionary socialist. He was born in Prussia, which is now Germany. He studied law and philosophy before turning to political theory. But due to his radical ideas, he actually lived much of his life in exile, most notably in London. This is where he develops most of his influential works. Marx really writes during the Industrial Revolution, and this, of course, is a time of massive economic and social upheaval. Factories, cities, and capitalist economies expand rapidly. Marx observes growing inequality, harsh working conditions, and the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of a few. Marx develops a theory of social change that centers on class conflict and economic power. Now, some of the core concepts would include historical materialism. Marx believed that history is shaped by material or economic conditions and not just ideas. The economic base, how goods are produced, determines the superstructure: law, politics, culture. Class conflict. Social change results in the ongoing struggle between the bourgeoisie, the owners of the capital, and the proletariat, the working class. When exploitation becomes unsustainable, it leads to revolution and systemic change. Now, this revolutionary change, Marx argued that change, it isn't gradual, it's transformational. He envisioned the overthrow of capitalism and the rise of a classless communist society. Now, he also identifies alienation. So under capitalism, workers become alienated from the products of their labor, from each other, and from their own human potential. Marx didn't write directly about the criminal justice system, but his theories are that, of course, deeply influence critical criminology and conflict theories of law. He did view law as a tool of the ruling class. The criminal justice system serves to protect the interest of the elite, not promote fairness. Laws are created and enforced to maintain existing power structures. He also brought attention to the criminalization of poverty, that behaviors associated with the poor, things like petty theft and homelessness, are more harshly policed than white-collar or corporate crimes. Now, he suggests that mass incarceration is a way for the wealthy to protect their self-interest. Marxist-inspired theorists see the prison system as a way to manage surplus labor and control marginalized populations in capitalist societies. Now, social movements that challenge police violence, incarceration, and inequality, like prison abolition, align with Marx's view of change from below, driven by oppressed groups. Marx's ideas laid the foundation for conflict theory, critical criminology, and radical critiques of capitalism and the legal system. His work actually does help us question who benefits from the law. Whose interests does the justice system serve? What would justice look like in a society without exploitation? Max Weber lived between 1864 and 1920. He was a German sociologist, political economist, and legal scholar whose work shaped the development of modern sociology. He was born into a well-connected intellectual family in Prussia. Weber was deeply influenced by German philosophy, law, history, and economics. He held academic posts across Germany and produced an extraordinary body of work that continues to influence sociology, political science, and public administration. But Weber struggled with mental health issues throughout his life, but he still published foundational texts like The Protestant Ethic or The Spirit of Capitalism and Economy and Society. He was particularly interested in authority, rationality, bureaucracy, and the role of values in social science. Weber wrote during the late 19th and early 20th century. Of course, we know now that this is a period of profound political and economic transformation in Europe. And he lived through the rapid industrialization and bureaucratization of German society, the decline of monarchies, and the rise of liberal democratic ideals. The buildup and the aftermath of World War I, these upheavals, of course, informed his interest in how societies manage power, create order, and navigate change, especially through institutions. Now, Weber's approach to social change was complex and multidimensional. He rejected the idea that economic forces alone were the sole drivers of change. Instead, Weber emphasized culture, values, leadership, and rationalization. Let's look at some of these. Rationalization. Weber saw modernity as a process of increasing rationalization, where decisions and systems are based on rules, logic, and efficiency rather than tradition or emotion. Social change from this view involves moving from traditional authority to legal rational authority. This is especially visible in the rise of bureaucracies. Now, Weber defined three types of authority that help explain how societies are governed and how power shifts over time. You have traditional authority. These are kings or elders. Then you have charismatic authority. These could be revolutionaries or prophets. Then you have legal rational authority. This is police, courts, and bureaucracies. He believed that modern societies increasingly rely on legal rational authority. This is a hallmark of modernization and social change. Weber warned that increasing rationalization and bureaucracy could lead to what he called an iron cage, where individuals become trapped in a system of rules and procedures. They lose autonomy, creativity, and moral purpose. Weber believed that change happens when ideas and values like religious beliefs or ethical world views influence how people organize society. And of course, that leadership matters. Charismatic leaders can disrupt the system and usher in change. He believed institutions adapt as societies become more complex and legally governed. But unlike the functionalist, Weber did not see change as always orderly or adaptive. He saw it as conflicted, value-laden, and often irrational. Now, Weber's theories are really extremely relevant to our understanding of modern criminal justice systems and how they evolve. For instance, we look at bureaucracy and policing and courts. Law enforcement agencies reflect Weber's model of rational legal authority, organized, hierarchical, rule-bound, and task-specialized. There's a loss of discretion as justice becomes more bureaucratized. Officers, judges, and correctional staff may be bound by rules that reduce human judgment. We have charismatic justice reformers. Leaders like Brian Stevenson or Angela Davis represent Weber's idea of charismatic authority. They push against the legal rational system to drive reform. Rationalization in sentencing, the push for consistency and predictability in sentencing, like mandatory minimums, reflects Weber's concept of rationalization, but also risks dehumanizing the process. Weber gave us a toolkit to understand the complexities of power, legitimacy, and change in the modern institutions. And he helps us see how law and justice evolve, not only through rules, but also through culture, leadership, and values. He shows us that rational systems can both stabilize society and constrain human freedom. And social change often comes from tensions between different types of authority, especially when formal systems lose legitimacy. George Simmel lived between 1858 and 1918. Like our other conflict theorists, George Simmel was a German sociologist and philosopher and a cultural critic. Though less institutionally established than his contemporaries like Weber and Durkheim, he was highly influential and ahead of his time. Simmel taught at the University of Berlin and later at the University of Strasbourg. And, of course, his work spanned philosophy, art, culture, economics, and social theory. Now, unlike other sociologists who focused on large institutions or systems, Simmel studied everyday interactions and the psychological experiences of people living in modern societies. Simmel lived through the late 19th century and early 20th century, and we know, of course, this was rapid urbanization and industrialization in Europe. And also this growing consumer culture, new forms of individuality and alienation, of course, in city life. This context deeply shaped his fascination with how modern life transforms social relationships, individuality, and human connection, themes that are central to understanding social change today. Now, Simmel didn't present a single theory of social change. Instead, he offered a micro-sociological view, showing how social change is rooted in everyday interactions and urban experience. He often focused on the tensions and contradictions and dualities of modern life. Now, some of his most influential work includes the Metropolis and Mental Life. Now, this is one of his most famous essays. Simmel described how life in a modern city overwhelms the senses, leading people to adopt a blasé attitude, a kind of emotional detachment. It's a survival mechanism. This reflects how social change affects human psychology, not just institutions. Urbanization changes how people form relationships and understand themselves. Another key piece of Simmel is social forms and interaction. Now, Simmel argued that society is built from patterns of interaction, which he called social forms. For example, the act of exchanging money, forming a secret, or being a stranger. These are all social forms that shape our behavior. When social forms change due to technology or to urbanization, so does society. Now, one of my favorites, Simmel also introduces the stranger. Simmel's concept of the stranger is someone who is both near and far, part of the group, but also different or outside it. This is a powerful way to understand how people on the margins, immigrants, the incarcerated, experience society. It also highlights how inclusion and exclusion are central to social change. Now, lastly, Simmel believes conflict can be a creative force. So, unlike Durkheim, who saw conflict as a threat to order, Simmel believed conflict is essential for change and for cohesion. Disagreements push groups to define their boundaries and to evolve. Now, conflict really isn't just destructive, it can build solidarity, force institutional change, and redefine norms. Now, Simmel saw social change as emerging from the micro level, from small-scale interactions and shifts in cultures and consciousness, a constant balancing act between individual freedom and social structure. Now, this, of course, was driven by contradictions: freedom versus control, closeness versus distance. His perspective is especially useful for understanding how individuals experience modernity, alienation, and identity within changing social environments. Simmel's ideas may not directly address criminal justice institutions, but they do offer some powerful insights. The stranger, for example, is a useful lens to analyze how society treats people on the margins, like ex-offenders, migrants, and those who might be under surveillance. Urbanization and surveillance. So Simmel's Metropolis essay can help explain how modern policing strategies develop in cities where anonymity and detachment are common. Conflict is catalyst. So Simmel would argue that social movements, protests, and even legal battles are not just disruptive, they are necessary mechanisms of change. And his attention to social forms help us understand courtroom dynamics, prison life, or even community policing as sites of micro-level interaction that reflect broader structures in society. Simmel really was a foundational voice in urban sociology, microsociology, and even social psychology. He helped us understand the inner life of individuals experiencing large-scale change, and how small, everyday encounters reflect and generate broader social shifts. And of course, the importance of culture, identity, and meaning in a modern world shaped by technology and complexity. Though often overshadowed by structural theorists, Simmel provides the missing link between personal experience and social transformation, and this is a vital lens in understanding justice, inequality, and reform today. Let's look at an example of conflict. Over the last few decades, the U.S. has seen skyrocketing incarceration rates, especially among Black, brown, and poor populations. And these are things that are driven by policies like mandatory minimums, the war on drugs, and three strikes laws. So conflict theories would interpret this as the policies are not neutral. They reflect the interest of powerful political and economic groups, so lawmakers and private prison industries. Incarceration is used as a tool of social control, disproportionately targeting marginalized groups, while white-collar crime is often underpunished. Movements like critical resistance argue that the system is structurally unjust and seeks to maybe dismantle prisons, defund police, and reallocate resources towards education, housing, and healthcare. Now, social change through conflict theory is that change doesn't emerge from within the system. It's demanded by the oppressed groups through organizing, resistance, and public pressure. While still radical to some, abolition has influenced mainstream policy reforms, such as ending cash bail in some jurisdictions, or decriminalizing drug possession, redirecting funds from policing to mental health crisis teams. Now, really the key conflict perspective takeaway is that this is an evolution. It's resistance and rebellion against a system that's seen as inherently oppressive. Okay, So here is another table to use as a cheat sheet for your exam. This one compares and contrasts the major features of functionalism and conflict theories. I recommend opening the PDF version of the slides and having it available when you take your exam. Okay, thanks for joining me. Please reach out to your instructor if you have any questions.